Arjun Sethi is a civil rights lawyer and a community activist. Today we will be talking to him about his book American Hate that chronicles the violence, the hate, the bigotry in Trump's America. Arjun, thanks for being a part of this conversation.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Arjun, you've traveled the length and the breadth of this country, chronicling, as I said, the violence, the hate, the bigotry, the discrimination. So before we go into the conversation, tell us how and why this book came together.
This book really came together because I was in touch with local activists, community organizations across the country, and they all said something similar. Hate was spiking during the 2016 presidential election and under the Trump administration. And I thought it was important to travel the country, meet with communities that had been targeted, meet with survivors, chronicle their stories. And that's really what I set out to do in this book, is to create not just an archive of this poisonous, a dangerous political moment, but to give agency to people who have been impacted and to capture their stories in this book and lay out some best practices for all of us to address hate.
You know, in the long tradition of chronicling America, you've traveled through the country. There's a part in the book where you talk about being run over by a car. What did it feel like to travel through America, Trump's America, and what did it feel like?
At times it was really hard. As a Sikh American, I can be readily identified because of my turban and beard. And throughout my journey, I did encounter incidents of hate. So for example, when I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a car was tailgating me for reasons that I don't know. The car then pulled up next to me, and when the driver saw me and appeared to notice my turban, he started gesticulating in this way as though he was sort of, mocking my turban, and then started screaming at me and sort of veered his car, towards my direction. And, I just sort of hit the brakes and pulled over to the side. That was a scary moment. When I was in Kalispell, Montana, I didn't feel safe. So I actually, for all of my meals, I wouldn't eat out. I would go to the grocery store, pick up something, and then eat it in my hotel room. And one time when I was at the grocery store, a cashier and a customer stared me down when I was in line, as though they didn't want to actually sell me the salad and the cookie that I had purchased. So it was tough, but I will say there were local activists, community organizations along the way who were incredibly helpful, supportive. They opened their homes to me. They drove me around on unfamiliar roads in unfamiliar places. And because of that, this book belongs to me, to the survivors, and really all the local activists and community organizations who do this work every day.
And before we talk about Trump's America, can you place this violence and hate and bigotry in the larger context of American history? Trump is not something new. There is a longer history to this.
As I sometimes say, hate pre-existed Trump and will endure after him, but it has nevertheless spiked in this moment. So what do I mean by that? In the book, I actually say that America was built on a hate crime, the decimation of Native communities, and was really furthered because of additional hate crimes and mass atrocities, including things like slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration. So hate has been a fixture of our country for as long as it has existed in different forms. White supremacy has been a fixture of our country for as long as it has existed. And I think what Trump did in large measure was, as a demagogue, sort of play onto those forces and capitalize on some of those sort of very dangerous sentiments like white supremacy, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-immigrant hostility, and really play into them. And what we've seen in this moment is a lot of those forces that have always been there come to the surface. And that's why survivors often use the term embolden. They say that Trump has emboldened these forces. He's using his bully pulpit to foster hate in this country on the basis of almost every human characteristic.
And let's kind of go back to the institutions as well. Trump is not the first president to have such inhuman immigration policies. Obama was also the deporter-in-chief. Obama also had his own version of Islamic ban for people from Islamic countries traveling in. So what specific things that Trump has done in terms of legislations and dismantling of institutions that has made this hate even more possible?
Sure. So, a couple of thoughts. The book captures the stories of people who are targeted by hate violence, and what we call state-sponsored forms of hate. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways or some of the ways in which, Trump has extended and intensified programs that were under the Obama administration are things like immigration raids. So we're seeing more brutal and cruel immigration raids under this president. We're seeing the caging and the separation of families. We are seeing an outright Muslim ban, a limit on a significantly reduced limit on the number of refugees who are allowed to enter this country. The rolling back of consent decrees, which have been used for a long time to keep police forces accountable. The rolling back of transgender protections for transgender students. Title IX for survivors of sexual assault. So in some ways, there is no question that President Obama and others created this architecture, but this administration has really intensified it. So it's not just domestic policies, it's also foreign policies. When you think about the war on terror in Guantanamo Bay is and always has been a prison for Muslim men. Extrajudicial drone strikes disproportionately impact Muslims in Muslim-majority countries. Climate change disproportionately impacts the global South. So you have a series of policies, both on the domestic and foreign front, that stigmatize various vulnerable communities that exacerbate hate and hate violence in this country.
And Arjun, when I was reading through this book, what I felt was pain, anger, and sometimes a deep sense of impotence. And the story that really broke my heart was the story of Khalid Jabara and his family talking about him. And the only thing that kept running in my head was his death could have been prevented. That there was no way why this child, I call him a child because he's so young and so, the way his family talks about him. He's so full of life, and he gave his life protecting someone else and was killed by a bigot. Can you talk to us about why this was in so many ways a preventable murder, and then nothing happened and nothing was done to save this boy's life?
The story is absolutely tragic, and I met with the Jabaras at their family home, and Khalid Jabara was murdered, 15 feet from where we sat, because he was murdered on his front doorstep. In so many ways, that was a totally preventable hate crime. And the reason I say that is because Vernon Majors, the murderer, had been terrorizing this Arab American family for years. Sometime before he killed Khalid Jabara, he actually ran over Khalid's mother, Haifa Jabara. He was then arrested, and the family was able to advocate in court that he not be allowed to post bond because he would be returning next door. He lived next door to the Jabaras. So initially, Vernon Majors didn't get bond, but then there was a change in prosecutors, and all of a sudden, Vernon Majors got bond, and the Jabaras are notified by phone one day that the man who had previously harassed them, targeted them, and ran over their mother would be returning home next door. And then months later, there was sort of the circumstances that ultimately culminated in Khalid's death. Vernon Majors' roommate started screaming outside, saying, he's shooting, because Majors was shooting a gun inside the house. So Khalid called the police like anyone would, and he was frantic. And he said, you have to come here. The neighbor is shooting a gun inside the house, and we're all in danger. So the police came. They knocked on Majors' door. He didn't answer. So the police went back next door to Khalid and said, there's nothing we can do. We don't hear any noise. He won't answer the door. Minutes later, Majors emerged from his house and shot Khalid to death. And if you think about that fact pattern, there are so many points in time where that murder could have been stopped, right? If they had been responsible and not let him out on bond, or at least imposed, serious restrictions about where he could stay, how close he could get to the family, all of those kinds of things. And then, of course, just minutes before Khalid died, he called the police. He notified them that he was fearful. And the police didn't do anything. And the Jabara family really believes that, had Vernon Majors not been white, the police would have kicked down that door. But because he was white, they let him get away with it. They didn't bother. And the culmination was the death of Khalid on his front porch.
And how does the family feel today? Do they have faith in the United States and its republic and its justice systems? How does the community now feel after what has happened to them?
Well, I don't want to speak for the family, and I encourage everyone to read the book. That their story is tragic. It is deeply sad, but they are also very resilient and hopeful people. They talk about the ways, that they are educating the community about Arab Americans. They're not Muslim, they're Christian, but educating the community about Christians in the Middle East, about Muslims in the Middle East. When I visited Tulsa, I attended the dedication ceremony for a library, the Tikkun Olam Khalid Jabara Memorial Library. So Victoria Jabara, Khalid's sister, is working with youth to make sure that they understand values of justice and inclusivity and equity. Rami Jabara, who's Khalid's brother, is working to ensure that survivors of crimes have certain rights and have their own advocates in court so that nobody has to suffer from the sort of same parade of incompetence and evils that they did. So they are remarkably resilient, they're remarkably hopeful, and they're speaking out. They're survivors. They are active in their community and they want to tell their story and keep their brother's memory alive.
And the other story that I wanted to touch upon is Taylor Dunston. Taylor is an activist and a recent graduate of the American University in Washington, D.C. And there's a line in her narrative where she says, "It showed me that our laws and institutions don't always protect people like me." And again, that was one of those moments in which, as someone who lives in this country, who believes in the justice system, it broke my heart that someone so young who is still fighting for justice believes at the heart of it that these institutions don't always protect people like me. And that's what she says.
Absolutely, right? And she says further, we face discrimination in every walk of life, including access to housing, employment, education, and healthcare. Our community is disproportionately subject to police stops, police violence, hate violence, and incarceration. And what Taylor's getting at is that this country, in many ways, was built on anti-Black racism. And if we are going to move forward and confront hate in this country, we have to resolve anti-Black racism. Some of the founders of Black Lives Matter have actually said that when Black folks are free, we will all be free, because anti-Black racism is so entrenched and ensconced in every facet of American life. So that moment where Taylor sort of realizes that after having had conversations with her family is very powerful. And I think it's a moment that, young people in the Black community and in other communities, sometimes experience that moment where they recognize that, what, this government, this country that I thought treated me equally really doesn't. And we are often the targets and victims of systemic discrimination in various ways.
Arjun, despite all the violence and pain, this is a deeply hopeful book because you finish it in a hopeful note, because you refer to all these incredible people you have met. My question to you is that we just came off a presidency, an Obama presidency, that promised us hope and so much more that could come from hope. In this Trump's America, is the politics of hope still a possibility? Is it still a way forward?
Absolutely. And I say that because people who are on the front lines, whether it's survivors, community organizers, local activists, impacted communities generally, they are often hopeful. they're not recoiling. They are coming forward in so many ways. They are advocating for policy changes at the local level, at the national level. They are building sanctuary networks. I met advocates who are encouraging community members to take self-defense classes, building neighborhood watch programs, encouraging houses of worship to become sanctuaries. The sanctuary network in this country is now over 700. There are 700 houses of worship and other who are giving sanctuary to undocumented immigrants. Survivors are telling their stories in books like this. There are so many ways. White allies at times are stepping up and engaging in anti-racism trainings. One of the things I talk about is that it's not enough to have, interfaith conversations. It's not enough to have multiracial conversations. We need to have anti-racism trainings and conversations, and folks are stepping up to do that. So wherever I went, I found that people are hopeful. And they're also hopeful. They're so hopeful that in some cases, survivors are even open to reconciliation. They're open to having difficult conversations with communities who mistrust them, in some cases with those who targeted them. And that is incredibly powerful, right? It is not easy when you have been the target of hate, whether it's cyberbullying, cyber trolling, your mosque has been vandalized, your synagogue has been vandalized, or you're the target of a hate crime, to come forward and say, I want to have a conversation. But survivors are often open to that. So I think there is plenty of hope and resilience and optimism across this country. You just have to know where to find it and just be open to it.